Hey everyone, I apologize for a little bit of a delay in this video, but we have been coming right into spring. Things are getting warm, we're getting lots of rain, and we're trying to build a tool shed, chicken shed, get the beds ready, and do lots of other stuff at the same time. So my apologies on the delay. This video will focus on the Asteraceae family. I'm going to chunk out this week into separate videos for Asteraceae, the Amanitas, and Caryophyllaceae in 3 different videos just because of the length of information, particularly with the asters. So without further ado, let's dig into the aster family. So why are we reading about asters this week? Asteraceae is the second largest family in the world. So in terms of the number of species that this plant family has, it's the second largest to the orchid family. I just had the opportunity to go to the New York Botanical Gardens this past week for the orchid show, where they were showcasing lots of different orchids. But yeah, so the asters, they're a very large family. They're more recently evolved, so they are composite flowers. So if you look at one dandelion flower or flower head, if you look closely, you'll notice that there's actually hundreds of little tiny flowers within that flower head. So as these plants evolved, they pushed all of their little flowering parts towards one centralized location, creating a one-stop shop for pollinators. And from there, it's been a very successful strategy. Even though it's more recently evolved, one of the more numerous, or the second largest family in the world. So really good to partner with those pollinators. It's really easy to identify this plant family, particularly if you see the flower, because it looks like an asteroid hit the center of that flower and exploded out with flowers. So you can think of the sunflower or echinacea or coneflower or dandelion. Any of those that have, daisies, they have the tons of ray petals coming out from that central disc. Yeah, so a lot of these plants will have ray and disc flowers. So the ray flowers, you think of like a ray, like a line, they're coming out of the center of the flower. On a sunflower, those would be the yellow petals coming out of the outside, and those are actually sterile flowers. And then the disc flowers are on the center. So that's where your seeds come from. So you think of a sunflower when it has those hundreds of seeds in the center. Those are each coming from an individual disc flower. So you have that disc in the center and then rays coming out. It's a very large family, so taxonomists have divided them into subfamilies and then also tribes. Don't worry about remembering these, but we are going to go through them just by subfamily and tribe just to break it down, but you don't need to memorize them right now. As you look at these, as you find them, you'll get to know them. One final note on this video, there's going to be a lot of information, so don't worry about getting it all in one time around. You're going to hear this lots. You're going to see these plants very commonly. So yeah, don't worry about that. So it's a really good family to know because of how common it is and how common some of its edible members are. One of the largest groups of edible flowers within this family is the chicory subfamily. So for the chicory subfamily, you can think of a dandelion flower. If you look at the flower closely, it looks like the ends of the petals are squared off, almost like the end of a strap just got cut off. They only have ray flowers, so they don't have that central disc like you would have with a sunflower. It's only a bunch of ray flowers. And all of these in this subfamily exude a milky sap when their stem or leaves are broken. Most of the plants within this subfamily, if not all of them, are edible. But that being said, there are other plants that have milky sap that are toxic. So think of the euphorbia family. You would not want to eat one of those. So before don't just go using the sap as an indicator for edibility. Sap is often an indicator for some other funky things that you would want to eat. But that's just how you can help identify this plant. So the flowers have the strap at the end, the squared off end, and they tend to exude a milky latex when they're broken. Some of the common edibles are chicory. This is a blue flower and is very common on roadsides and paths. Lactuca, your lettuce, that is in this subfamily. It has edible wild relatives that are edible as well, but I also think of them more as a sedative, so you can use them as tea or put them in a salad before you go into bed. Kind of a nice way to encourage sleep. Prananthes, or gall of the earth, I like to call it, or my teacher Mark likes to call it gall of the earth because it's galling in terms of how many different shapes its leaves take, but you can get an eye for this one pretty easily. It is edible, but it's very bitter, but it's very common in the woods, so it's fun to know little edible nibbles if you're hiking through the woods. Sow thistle, also called Sanchus, is the genus. It's an introduced plant that is edible, but it is also spiny, so you need to figure out a way to take off the spines. You can use a knife to kind of shear off the surface, or you can probably, I guess, like kind of running them over a fire would get rid of the spines. But if you can figure out a way to get rid of the spines, they're edible. Dandelion is the favorite here, Taraxacum officinale. Dandelions are diuretic, so they increase, they cause your body to urinate more. When you are given a prescription diuretic, you often have to take potassium with it as well. But if you've ever pulled out a dandelion root, you'll notice how deep that root is, and those roots are pulling up tons of minerals. So it's a potassium-sparing diuretic. So even though you're excreting more potassium, you're ingesting way more than you're excreting. The name dandelion comes from dent de lion, or tooth of the lion. So if you'll notice, the leaf is very toothed. It's not native to North America, but it is ubiquitous. It's used as a liver tonic. That bitter flavor is often a sign that things are help with digestion and help with the liver. Another common edible, not common, but a good edible in this plant family is salsify. It was a very common edible root in Europe, and it's actually really delicious. If it's dried right, it can become really sweet. Next subfamily is the thistle subfamily. Almost all of these are edible as well, as long as you can avoid the spines when they do have spines. Burdock is in this plant family. The root is amazing food. It's a very common introduced species. The root is specific for acne and skin issues, so it's a very nourishing root. It can help kind of heal the digestive tract, and a really good food as medicine example. Cornflower and bachelor's buttons are also in the thistle subfamily. Centaurea is the genus. They have edible flowers. Spotted knapweed is in this genus as well, and it's very invasive. We have a lot on our property here. I'm interested to see how that plays out this year. Edible but spiny and probably a little bit finicky to harvest, but incredibly common invasive species, so good to know it's edible. Cirsium thistles, again, avoid the spines. The roots are edible, a little bit finicky to harvest, but if you have them in your garden and you're pulling them out anyway, might as well harvest them, just wash them off in a colander. And they would probably make a really good ferment because they have a lot of starches in their fibers. So if you ferment them, that turns to sugars and other kinds of things and can be delicious. Milk thistle, Silybum, also can be pretty invasive. I know in California it's very invasive, and I think a little bit in the South. Edible as well, and used for liver issues. So it's hepatoprotective, which means liver protecting. And supposedly for Amanita mushrooms, it binds to the same receptors that these aminotoxins bind to in the liver, so it can help protect against Amanita. I wouldn't try it, just don't eat a poisonous Amanita. Next tribe is the boneset tribe. This plant family has some pyrrolizidine alkaloids. And before I get into the boneset family, pyrrolizidine alkaloids, we're going to talk more about these in our Poisonous Plants week, but pyrrolizidine alkaloids are alkaloids that act on the liver over time. So they didn't know about these for a long time, but then they started looking at epigenetic studies, large population studies, and noticing that people who were eating specifically bracken fern, I'm not sure if this is how they discovered it, but they noticed, one of the examples is they noticed that people who were eating bracken fern populations, there were very high rates of liver cancer. And this wouldn't show up until people were around 40. So it was hard to say that, it's not like you eat bracken and you die. It was you eat bracken, you eat bracken, you eat bracken for your whole life, and then a lot of people end up with liver cancer. So they had to do these large studies and found out that bracken was actually contributing to liver cancer, and it was actually specifically these pyrrolizidine alkaloids within the plant that were causing this long-term damage. Now, that's not to say that you can't have, a one-off thing. It's like drinking one beer is not going to kill you. Drinking lots of beer over lots of time or in a short amount of time can kill you. So pyrrolizidine alkaloids, just something to know about, especially for consistent eating. Within this boneset family, boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum, is one of the major medicines I think of. It's used for knitting bones together. So my teacher, Matt Wood, would say that it almost allows the ends of bones to find each other. So if you have your femur cracks, it almost like allows the ends, the fibrils, to find each other and knit back up. It's also used for fevers where it feels like your bones are aching and breaking. So really, really, really bad fevers. This can help break that. It's also a really interesting one where the the body knows what it needs. So Matthew Wood has a couple stories about somebody bringing bones to an elderly person who was in the hospital, and their bedmate actually drank a bunch of it and got better. But the tea itself is incredibly bitter to anybody who doesn't need it. So if you didn't need it, you would not be able to drink the quantities that this person had drank. The Gnaphalium subfamily. The main one that sticks out to me here is Pseudognaphalium obtusifolium, or rabbit tobacco. It's very common in kind of like sandy, not great soils, and Matt Wood uses it for issues from birth. So when I'm making a formula and then somebody has a congenital issue, I will throw rabbit tobacco in there to enhance the effects for that specific issue. Chamomile tribe, this one's a big one. Yarrow is a really good one to know here. Achilles millefolium. It's called Achilles because this is the herb that Achilles supposedly used to heal all of his soldiers. And millefolium because it has tons and tons and tons of little flowers. So milli means thousand or million, and folium, leaves, so 1,000 leaves. It's edible. You don't have it in large doses. It has really strong aromatics, and you'd probably get sick of it after a while. Really strong flavor. Amazing for deep wounds. So if you cut yourself deep with a knife, or like there's been stories of chainsaw wounds and things like that, like really bad deep wounds, get yarrow, put it on there. It's styptic, so it stops the bleeding very quickly, and also can heal things really quickly. I've got a bunch of cuts from knives on my fingers and use yarrow. It stops it up. The cuts heal way faster. It's really an incredible plant that way. Chamomile. Chamomile is the flowers are an amazing tea. It's really good for relaxation and gut health. It's one of the few herbs that we use with young children because it's not overpowering, but it's very effective. And the specific indication is one of my favorite. It's for fussy, whiny babies of all ages. So if you're ever feeling just kind of like cranky and fussy, go for a glass of chamomile tea. It can really help just take away some of that fussiness. Artemisia is in this family. Now, the Artemisia genus is a very interesting genus. Sagebrush, so when people think of traditional smudges, that is sagebrush that has been harvested. Sagebrush is being over-harvested. Some commercial companies are really getting into it. It's cultural appropriation in not a great way, and also this sagebrush grows on very sensitive lands that are very dry. The prairie sage grouse also relies on sage for reproducing and eating. It's one of the few animals that can eat sage. If you want to search sage grouse, prairie sage grouse on YouTube or something like that, you can see their mating dance is amazing. But it's an endangered species right now, which is very unfortunate. This is because of over-harvesting of sage for sale, and also agriculture is encroaching on their lands. This genus Artemisia also includes Artemisia absinthium, used in absinthe, also known as wormwood, that has psychoactive properties that come out stronger when it's fermented. So traditional absinthe has that kind of like association with the green fairy. Another plant in this genus that's very common around here is Artemisia vulgaris, or mugwort. And if you look up mugwort, you have seen this all over the place. It's very common along roadsides and disturbed spaces. And it's used as a sedative, also as a liver protector. So when you steep it in water, it has hepatoprotective properties. But it also contains something called thujone, which is alcohol soluble, which actually is not great for your liver, supposedly. So it's interesting to see that the difference in preparation with this plant makes all the difference. It also encourages very strong dreams. So some people will take it and put it under their pillow, and just the scent of the plant will cause you to have very vivid dreams sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, but this is a plant that gives you what you need and not what you want. So take that as you will. Chrysanthemum, also in this, the chamomile tribe, has edible flowers. Oxydaisy, or lycanthemum, is an introduced species and has delicious, one of my favorite wild greens. Pretty easy to identify the leaf. So that's oxydaisy, and the flowers are also edible. And then pineapple weed, Matricaria. It's a really delicious plant, but I often find it in driveways, and I don't really want to eat something that's growing out of the cracks of a driveway. Tansy is also in this family. It's got a lot of medicinal aspects about it. It's a very strong smelling plant. Very common, pretty invasive plant as well. I haven't dug into its medicine. We had it a lot on the farm we were working with last year, but we can dig into that another time. The groundsel tribe, a new tribe. Pedicides is used for headaches, like really bad headaches and migraines. But again, it has those pyrrolizidine alkaloids, so you wouldn't want to take that over long periods of time. It's also called butterbur. Tussilago, coltsfoot, really common along disturbed spaces and roadsides. We have a bunch on our driveway. So it's introduced species, but very common on compacted roadsides and things like that. Marigold tribe, not many native marigolds around here in the Northeast. They're really more native to the Southwest and the highlands of Mexico. The petals on marigold, if it is the tagetes, are edible. Caution with harvesting and eating cultivated plants, because oftentimes in the horticultural trade they use things for herbicides and pesticides that are not meant for human ingestion. Sunflower tribe, this one has a lot of different edible and medicinal plants. Arnica, used externally for bruises, not to be used internally except in homeopathic doses because it can be toxic to the heart. Arrowleaf balsam root, I really like this one because when I was just getting into plants and I was living in Wyoming, this grew all over the Teton Valley in Teton National Park. So you see these beautiful little mini sunflowers and the softest leaves as well. The young leaves are apparently edible. The roots are edible raw or cooked, but again, that kind of dry, very short growing season, I'd be careful with harvesting too much. Not that you're going to go out and harvest much of that. Echinacea, this is the one a lot of us have heard of. It's used for the early onset of a cold or flu. It inhibits hyaluronidase, which is an enzyme which breaks down hyaluronic acid, which is the stuff between your cells. So this is a really good snake bite remedy. So people who have a snake bite, some snake bites have hyaluronidase in them, and that'll basically break down your cells. So echinacea can help to combat that. The flower cone, if you break that and chew on the inside, it's really, really diffusive. And diffusive means that it's like numbing and tingling to the mouth. So if you chew that, it's really fun. I've shown some kids that, and they really like it. It's a really interesting sensation. Galansoga, also in the sunflower tribe. Galansoga is a very, very common introduced species. I call it Gallant Soldier because it marches across fields. It's originally from South America, but it has been introduced here. Very common. It can go from seed to seed in 21 days. So if you don't weed this out of your garden, you're going to have it in your garden a lot. It's edible when cooked, but you want to make sure you wash it, as the hairs tend to pick up sand and grit. But it's a very common plant, and farmers are often elated and ambivalent when I tell them that's edible because it's so common. Helianthus, this is your sunflower genus. So Helianthus tuberosa is Jerusalem artichoke, or known as sunchoke. It's not from Jerusalem, and it's not an artichoke. Who knows why they call it that. It's kind of like a potato, very high in inulin, so a lot of people will ferment them before they cook them, but it's a native plant. It's perennial, so you can plant it once and it'll just keep on spreading. You harvest it every winter, or after the first frost, and then it gets a little sweeter. And even if you try to harvest all of that, you miss a little tiny root and it'll come back. So a really good plant to have, and but make sure that you know where you're planting it because it will be there and it will spread unless you harvest it. And then sunflower. We grow sunflowers for their seeds, amazing source of fats. Alrighty. The ragweeds. Ambrosia is the main one in this one that I think of. Many people think that goldenrod causes hay fever in the fall because they see these beautiful yellow flowers and they're all over the place, and then they get sinus issues. But it's actually ragweed. And ragweed has pollen that's shaped like a medieval mace. So when you actually inhale it, it is physically irritating your sinuses. That being said, ragweed and goldenrod are two herbs that are supposed to be good for hay fever. The tick seed tribe, Biden's beggar's ticks, Biden's alba, apparently edible cooked. I haven't had much experience with that, nor do I have much experience with sneezeweeds. And then the Aster tribe. Most of the Aster genus that was in North America has been reclassified to Symphyotricum. Just from genetic testing, it's that much different than the European asters. New England aster, Symphyotricum novae Angliae, is used for asthma. And a lot of these plants in this tribe tend to have an acrid flavor, which is kind of like it's like a burn. It almost tastes like it's like a burning sensation. It's like you're eating like a burnt cigarette. It's not. You wouldn't want that flavor necessarily unless you knew what it's for. And that flavor that sensation is actually relaxing to the body. So when you have something like New England Aster that's acrid, it can relax the lungs and it can help for asthma. In this tribe as well is your goldenrods, solidago, good for hay fever, really nice as a tea. So that is a lot about the Aster family. Feel free to rewatch this. I will write this up and try to get it. We have 3 volunteers this weekend, so I'm going to try to get in here and get a bunch of extra information up. But yeah, feel free to rewatch this. If you have any questions, let me know.